Truckers and long-distance drivers of Reddit, what are some of your spookiest, unexplained stories of the road, part 2? Please do like, share, and subscribe. I was driving cross-country on my way home to Maine. I'd had enough interstate driving and decided to take back roads the rest of the way home when I got to New Hampshire. So, I'm way out in the boondocks, past the White Mountains, when I see the most effed up and hilarious thing of my whole life. Up ahead was a small human on a shitty old tricycle weaving back and forth on the road. I slowed down as not to hit them, and as I went by at a crawl, I had to rubberneck several times. It was what appeared to be a midget, has a beard, was dressed like an elf in medieval-type clothes and a pointy hat. He was wearing dark glasses and was tapping along the road with long wooden stick. So yeah, it was apparently a blind gnome on a tricycle. I'd been driving all day, but didn't feel tired at all. I think it was just some midget with an awesome sense of humor out fucking with people. Or maybe he was crazy. I don't know. I was driving a shortcut from 29 Palms, California to Albuquerque, New Mexico. 29 Palms is located in the desolate desert east of LA. The shortcut was all two-lane road through total nothingness, except for passing through Amboy, California. Amboy is a nearly abandoned town, nearly as far below sea level as Death Valley, with a dormant volcano and lava field on one side and a salt flat on the other. It was also, at the time, a hotspot for satanic group activity. So, I'm driving by myself in the afternoon. I stopped in Amboy and snapped a picture of the city sign just to prove I was there to friends who dared me to take that route to I-40. I got back in my car and proceeded to drive up into the mountain range between Amboy and I-40. Once I reached the top, I'm driving north through a canyon with high grass on both sides of the road. Up ahead, I see some stuff in the middle of the road. As I approach, I slow down to see a red Pontiac Fiero stopped sideways across both lanes, a suitcase open with clothes scattered everywhere, and two bodies laying face down in the road, a man and a woman. I stop 100 feet or so away, and the hair on the back of my neck is standing up. Being a Marine, I reach under the seat and pull out a 9mm pistol and chamber a round. Something seemed very wrong. It looked too perfect, as if it were staged. An ambush? Was I being paranoid? Something was just wrong. Getting out of the car seemed unthinkable. It was the horror movie move. As I scanned the road, I saw a line I could drive, past the guy in the road on his left, swerve to the right side of the woman, behind the Fiero, and I'd be on the other side. I dropped it into first gear, punched it, and drove the line I planned. I passed the back of the Fiero without hitting it or either of the bodies in the road. I continued forward a couple hundred feet and slowed down so I could breathe and let my heart slow down. As I looked up in the rearview mirror, I saw that the two bodies had gotten up to their knees and 20 or so people emerged from the tall grass on either side of the road by the car and bodies. At that moment, my right foot smashed the gas pedal to the floor and did not let up until I had to slow down for the I-40 East on-ramp. I will never know what would have happened to me had I gotten out of the car to check on the bodies or stopped my car closer to them. Somehow, I do not think it would have been good. Sometimes real life can be scarier than a movie. I don't have a spooky story, but I did have a near-miss experience that almost made me crap myself. My dad is my co-driver, and we were in Atlanta, and it had rained a bit. Traffic is a bit congested, but not as bad as Atlanta can get. But then everyone suddenly starts braking, and a semi to my left and ahead of me starts jackknifing, and his trailer goes sideways, skidding along the road with the length of his truck blocking all three lanes. I brake like I've never braked before. The motherfucker manages to correct himself, I have no idea, and I managed to squeeze through the gap between his aft and side of the road and avoid what could have easily been a horrible accident. He goes along like nothing happened. Then my dad, who had been sleeping, reamed me for not keeping enough of a distance to avoid needing to brake so hard, and thus waking him up, and didn't believe me when I told him the awesome, scary thing I just managed to avoid. Coming home from work one night around 11 p.m., about a mile from home, I come up to police lights, fire trucks, ambulances, then some car wreckage. Everyone always rubbernecks accidents like these. After this one, I don't do it anymore. I had my window down, and just as I was at my closest to the accident, I had a clear view of the driver's side door of one of the cars. A woman was on her knees in the street with her arms around her teenage daughter, who was slumped half out of the driver's seat. The daughter was unconscious and covered in blood. Just as I'm driving past, I heard the mother scream, "Oh God, please don't take my baby." Her hysterical tone of voice continues to chill my bones even as I type this. This happened probably 15 years ago. Please drive carefully, everyone. The most disturbing thing that's ever happened to me was on a long drive back to college for my last semester before graduation. I'm a night person and was leaving kinda late for the drive, but was expecting to get in around midnight. Being that I would be living on my own after school, I was feeling a bit sentimental, as it felt like I was leaving home for the last time. Home was somewhere else now. So, it's sunset as I'm driving towards the highway, and there's a beautiful low fog in the fields along the road catching the light. I decide around then that it'd be nice to try for a more scenic backroads route than the typical turnpike stuff, so I decide to cut off towards West Virginia. I stop at a diner, get gas, then proceed toward the West Virginia line as night falls. This is the last human contact I make for the rest of the drive. I didn't foresee it, but an immense dense fog dropped over Appalachia that night, slowing my drive considerably. At some points in the mountains, there were scarcely 10 or 15 feet of visibility, but there are some small towns the road leads me through. It's Friday night though, and it begins to feel oddly dead in each town as I pass through. It'd be 9 or 10 p.m., and the local bars would look closed. There were no lights on in any of the houses. I felt uneasy, but maybe that's just how it is there. Anyway, I'm making terribly slow progress with the fog and the back roads at night, deer sightings keeping my foot a little light when the fog wasn't too bad. But at some point, I'd have to nose my way through the foggy intersections, unsure if I'd find the other side. It was almost impassably dense at times, and the trip would take double the estimated time to arrive because of it. I'm often driving around 25 miles per hour or worse, trying to be safe, and it's around 1 or 2 a.m., and there's no cell phone service as I get into a large national forest. There's no other traffic around. There has been little all night, so I decide to pull over to pee, leaving the engine on for whatever reason. It'd be a quick stop. I'm not fearless by any means, but I try not to let myself get too jumpy in the woods at night. But as I'm coming around the car, undoing my belt, I hear voices maybe 40 or 50 yards into the forest, and then they're scrambling through the dead leaves and brush coming in my direction. It's pitch black, night, no streetlights or houses, national forest, cloudy, foggy, starless, moonless night, and I can't see anything off the road beyond the red glow of the taillights. Feeling sufficiently freaked out and not willing to find out more, I bolt back to the driver's side and floor it up the next hill. Happy I had left the car on anyway. My heart is pounding. I never find out more about this little scare, and I'm glad for it. A little while longer, and I'm heading up some steep mountains and nearing an old fire watch tower from the World War II days. There's a plague, roughly about it being a community morale builder, to have built it even if it didn't affect the war in any way. I pulled it to the overlook to actually pee because I never got the chance earlier. Now that I'm atop a sizable mountain, I suddenly get cell service and a string of concerned texts from my mom freaking out and asking if I made it okay. By this time, I should have been at my house hours ago, but I took a long and unfamiliar way in the dark and intense mist. Knowing that she won't go to sleep until I'm there, she's like that, I respond that I'm safely home, hoping that it will end. She immediately calls me and asks where I am, and I can't really ignore her call, having just texted her. I tell her I'm home, and she asks, in Virginia? And I say, yeah, in my college town, despite being at the top of a mountain in a national forest in West Virginia. She sounds deeply unsettled and says she's been trying to call me repeatedly while I had no service. I ask why, and she said she got a really weird phone call from West Virginia, but way west of where you should have been, which is where I actually was. She said she got this phone call and a gruff young man with a backwoods-sounding voice was telling her he needed to speak to my name and swearing at her and saying all these nasty things. She said she heard people in the background screaming and people laughing. She hung up and called me a few times, but it went straight to voicemail. She typed the number in Google and saw it was from West Virginia and knew I was at least passing through a small part of it and called the number back. A small child answered and swore at her. Then the earlier voice ripped the phone back and started saying my name again and saying that he needed to speak to me. This is especially strange because I was driving my dad's car and I'm not registered to it, so even if they were somewhere, saw my plates and could run them, they'd get his name. I think I even paid with cash at the diner and gas station way back near the start of the drive 5+ hours earlier, and in another state. I can't think of anything I could have dropped with my name on it when I stepped out of the car briefly earlier during the recent incident. I still had all my cards and my ID. It would have been an incredibly strange coincidence or extremely elaborate scare prank either way. I do my best to reassure my mom I have no idea what that could be about and that it must be a weird coincidence. I tell her I'm at my house and I'm okay, despite how troubling I find all this in reality. She gives me a half-hearted okay, and we say goodnight. I pull out of the watchtower, pull off, and continue on into Virginia. Never have I been so comforted by the 3 a.m. dregs of late-night parties, students stumbling home at a nearby university town off a highway I know well from my usual route. I carry on to that highway and make it safely, and things have been completely normal since. But I've never brought it up with my mom again, nor have I ever had the heart to tell her where I was driving that night, or how late, or of the voices in the woods. There's no climax and no resolution. I'm trying to forget. On my way home from a rather long trip with my mother, we got to a bridge where we saw an elderly woman in a white nightgown. Think Grandma Death Roberta Sparrow from Donnie Darko. It was fall, so rather cool, and the sun was already setting behind the trees. So the white nightgown really showed in the dark. She was just walking. Problem was that she was barefoot and completely clean, like nothing had touched her at all. We had been on this road before the bridge for at least 10 miles, and we had another 15 before we got to anything that even resembled civilization. It's the road and ample trees for miles and miles around. We stopped and asked her where she was going and if she was with anyone. Kept mumbling to herself, but I remember her eyes. Her eyes were wide as if she had just seen something frightening. The whites of her eyes were bleached white, and the pupil was straight jet black. She never made eye contact with us and just kept walking forward. We drove off and called the police. We both kept expecting her car or someone to be on the road ahead, but there was no one at all. Stuff like that doesn't happen at all there, so it was pretty startling to say the least. Very plausible that it was dementia or something along those lines, but once more, walking on foot so many miles deep on this road is just unheard of. If anything, that scared us more. Several months ago, I saw a huge group of people walking, over 20 people. This was at 3 a.m. off the frontage road that isn't really that spooky part. It got spooky when I noticed not one of these people were walking normally. They were stiff in their movements, like the act of walking was foreign to them, and they weren't walking as a group, like they all kept their distance from each other. It's hard to explain. My girlfriend and I were to go on a backpacking trip in NorCal. She had worked that afternoon until 5, so we didn't hit the back roads to the mountains off the highway until just before dark. The route we took was plenty familiar and went through a nice country area. This was our second trip to the same place. Only the first time we came there happened to be during an OHV competition, so the place was really populated. This time it was not. And my girlfriend joked about this movie where a serial killer cleaned out a town and just kinda played shop after killing everyone. Of course, she then falls asleep, leaving me and our dog up alone. The whole drive through the town and then the farmlands went by without meeting a single person. When we finally started our descent of the unanimated mountain access road, I get that nagging feeling that someone's there and you just can't see them. So I turn on the CB to hear any traffic nearby from campers or night trail drivers and get nothing. Now this truck is 22 years old and it has some issues now. But about 2 hours into the mountain, the pitch black in the cab gets interrupted by a bright orange check engine light, which goes back off a minute later. It's now dark enough that I turn on the overhead high-power lights to give myself some comfort as to our surroundings. Just then, the CB, which I forgot was on, squealed out the worst static ever, and I jumped to turn it off. Looking back up to this big-ass deer was standing in the road, and I had to slam on the brakes, stalling the truck and bringing back the check engine light. Now it's dark. The truck's off. The check engine light is on, and the damn dog starts whining. I try the key, and the engine whines but no start. I sit there and wait a while, and hallelujah, it worked. When we got to the trailhead, surprisingly we found around 10 cars parked, which is a hell of a lot more than comfort permits, especially so far out alone. And when I get out of the cab, I notice a group of around 8 sitting on an overlook. They turn to me and one of them says, "Glad you made it all right." I later realized that the vantage point made it so someone was able to watch us the whole 3-hour drive up that mountain, all while I sat in that cab feeling so damn alone. Sure helps you remember that there's always someone who's watching, even if you think. I remember on a long road trip, 14 plus hours with my dad to Colorado, we saw a car barrel past us like 100 something. Keep in mind it was about 9 o'clock and we still were hours behind schedule and had a long way to go with a short time to get there. Now, it isn't odd to see bad speeders on the road, but since we were in the middle of nowhere, we had no idea where this guy came from. We continued driving for a few minutes and saw another car speed past us at about the same speed. Funny thing was, it looked like the same car, same color, same model SUV. We shrugged it off as a coincidence and continued. About the same amount of time had passed and we saw it again, passing us. That time, we were very sure it was the same car. This pattern continued twice more before my dad pulled off into a motel to spend the night and delay our trip. My dad is usually a very sensible person that's hard to scare, but I've never seen his face so ashen and afraid. He's never talked to me about the incident since and doesn't allow me to drive after 9:30. I used to go to school really far away from my hometown with my sister. Our mother drove us. Part of the route was through a wooded area. Whilst looking out the windows, we noticed what looked like people just standing by the trees, some actually in the trees. This happened every day for a good year or so, but every day they would be in different positions. They looked real, but we put it down to being mannequins or sort of scarecrows. One day, they just weren't there anymore. I've tried looking it up on the internet to no avail. There was about 8 or more years ago, and we still don't know what it was or even why someone would go to that effort. I might be late. I was riding with some friends and we decided to make a stop at this creepy warehouse that's in this small neighborhood. We drive up to it and this van behind us stops as well and turns on its brights, so we get freaked out and drive off. We felt ballsy, I guess, and decided to go back thinking he was gone. We go back and we look around, nothing, and we decide to not go into this creepy as hell warehouse. So we're driving and I'm extra paranoid and I turn around and all of a sudden I see the same van driving with its light off, following us on the road. I scream, "Fuck, that car is back." So we drive off fast and the driver goes to the left and speeds past us and cuts us off. We're completely trapped. He gets out, screaming. I thought we were dead. Was he going to shoot us? Apparently, he was a dad who was doing a security shift for the neighborhood because a lot of people try and do drugs in that warehouse or other weird activities. He was pretty nice, but I felt the crazy driving was unnecessary. Around 95 to 97, I was driving to Michigan to visit family. I live in Kentucky. I normally like to drive on long-distance trips like that during the midnight hours because there's less traffic. Passengers usually sleep, which makes for longer hauls in between stops, and quite frankly, I don't like dealing with other people or drivers. There was one big stretch of road going up through Ohio or maybe Indiana, can't exactly remember, that was going fine and nothing out of the ordinary. I then start noticing a bright light up ahead. I wasn't sure if it was another vehicle or a gas station, but I thought it seemed a lot brighter than usual. As I kept driving, I could tell it was moving and was getting bigger and bigger. I wake my cousin and tell him to check it out. We're both staring as it is clearly moving closer and becoming more brighter and more larger with every passing second. Then, suddenly it seemed as if it instantaneously just flew directly overhead and felt as if was only a few feet above the car. It never made a sound, but was moving ridiculously fast and, for lack of a better description, was just like a bright white ball of fire. I watched it move out of the distance through my rearview mirror, hands down the craziest thing I ever saw in my life.